Hi, I'm Leslie Rock, and I'm going to talk today about how to make California rolls. First of all, you should assemble your ingredients because you can get kind of caught up in all the details of this recipe. You need rice, and you don't have to have Japanese sticky rice, although it's nice, but you could use any kind of rice except for the American converted or minute rice or something like that. Those don't work out so well. And I usually cook my rice in a rice cooker, but we'll talk about that later. So you need rice, and you need rice vinegar, and you need nori. Those are sheets of seaweed that you'll use to roll up the rolls in. And usually you want to use artificial crab or real crab and avocado or ripe avocado. And for the inside parts, you can put almost anything. You can use cooked carrots or even scrambled egg. So the first thing you do is you put your rice on, and you just follow the recipe for the cooking instructions for the rice. And at the last minute, when the rice is almost done, you put in about a cup of that rice vinegar. And so it'll end up being sticky and have a little more flavor than regular rice. And you get your sheets of nori, and you can roll this out on a bamboo roller, although you don't need to get so fancy. You could just do it with your bare hands on a cutting board or something like that. So you put the rice just a little bit in the middle of these sheets of nori in a long strip, and then you can put your fake crab sliced into like a julienne, and same with the avocado, and you can use your cooked carrots and put those in the center, and then you roll it up, and it sticks together itself, but at the very end you should take a little bit of water on your finger and just put that on the seam of the rolled up nori so that it'll stick a little better, and then leave them rolled up. Don't cut them right away. So you want to get all of your rolls assembled and put together, and then just before serving, you get a knife with a rather sharp knife, not with serrated edge. It works better when you have a sharp edge but not a serrated edge, and put some water on the blade so you get a smooth cut, and then you cut the rolls up, and you'll end up with little California rolls, and they're a big hit at parties, especially football parties and whatnot, when you mostly have people bringing chips and dip, and then you bring these California rolls, and they're a huge hit. Although the kids don't like them much, especially when you serve them with wasabi, which is quite hot, but really tasty. So next time you have a party to go to, make California rolls for your friends.
Hi, my name is Bobby Jordan. Today, we're going to take a look at the early years of William Shakespeare. Now, the information that I'm going to give you is in your textbook. You have two textbooks for this course, and the first one is Shakespeare of London by Marchette Chute. That's spelled C-H-U-T-E. The other textbook is called Shakespeare Alive, and that is edited by Joseph Papp. If we really want to understand the man, though, we have to look at the humble beginnings of his father. We've got to look at the town that he came from. You don't understand why he has such a good grasp on the common man, the porter in a play like Macbeth, until you know about Stratford and what it was like to live there in the years circa about 1550. We want to take a look first then at John Shakespeare, William's father. John was the son of a tenant farmer. His brother was a tenant farmer. It didn't take young John very long to realize that if you farmed someone else's land, you were not going to make a very good living. John had bigger ambitions. Lucky for him that he lived next to a market town called Stratford. Now, I know we're talking about 1550, but the important thing is, in terms of rural England, these were still medieval towns. They hadn't moved into, quote, the Elizabethan era. So when we think about Stratford, it's a very small town, and yet it had something really important for a man like John Shakespeare. It had a middle class. Generally, throughout England, you were either very poor or very rich. But if you could sell goods and make money at it, then you were not poor. Then you had a good living. Then you belonged to a union. Then you could get married and raise a good family. And that's what John Shakespeare was after. So he moved into Stratford. He took a look around and he said, what do people need that I can supply? and what they needed was gloves. Now, in modern times, that would be ridiculous. We don't wear gloves very much, especially in the western states, and especially here in California. But in England, think about it. A person didn't go outside to go to work without gloves on. It would be, the parallel today would be if I were going to go to an office and I didn't wear hose, or if a man was going to go to work in a bank and he didn't have a tie on. Gloves were a commodity that everybody needed and everybody wore. So if you wanted to make money, you wanted to make something that everybody would buy. John not only was a glover, and a very good one, he was known as a, quote, white glover. That means he made gloves out of the finest lamb skin, and they were white as snow. So very rich people began to buy John Shakespeare's gloves. You would think that'd be enough for him, but it wasn't. Because he knew he could make a good business, and he did, and he bought 2 houses in the middle of Stratford, and then he decided he'd better go into politics. Because he was a common man, there was no way he was going to gain glory unless he went into politics. He first became an ale taster. Now, we think that's kind of strange that somebody go around drinking beer and get paid for it, but he did. This was a time when people loved rules. You got to understand that. There were rules for everything, and if you broke them, you got fined. Let me give you some examples. If your dog was outside of your property without a muzzle, you paid a fine. If your duck was caught wandering in the road, you paid a fine. If you were caught playing cards, you paid a fine. And suppose your children were not home by 8 o'clock at night, which was the curfew in Stratford. You paid a fine. You were even fined for not being in church on Sunday. And should you want to dump something on your own property, everybody had to dump what they wanted to dump at the common dump at the end of the street. Why did that work so well? Well, if you want to run a township, you have to have money. And besides, it was the kind of thing that Elizabethans, medieval people just loved. So when John became the ale taster, what he did was he went around town and checked everybody's business. It was called ale taster, but he also checked the butchers and the bakers. And actually in the bars, he made sure that the right amount of hops were used to make the beer. He made sure that when the women delivered that the cartons or the cases were sealed tight so nothing could get in them. And he did his job very well. He did it so well that in 2 more years, he was made a constable. Now he's moving up, you see. He's making good money, but he's moving up politically. During these years, he also found a wife. He looked very carefully, and of course in those days, it didn't matter if anybody fell in love. People got married because of land. If I have 50 acres, and my neighbor has 50 acres, and I have a girl child and he has a boy child, when they're 3 or 4 years old, we promise them to each other. So that when I die, or when my neighbor dies, one of those kids will get not 50 acres, but the 2 of them together will have 100 acres. Your land was your wealth. John picked a young girl called Mary Arden, and what she brought with her were the lands of her father. So in addition to this very industrious man making money on his own, he was wise enough to marry a woman, strong, healthy, the youngest daughter, who absolutely was the apple of her father's eye and got most of the land. Mary and John had 2 children first, and both of them were girls, and neither of them lived past the age of 3. Now, that's not an unusual thing either at this time in England. You, first of all, no birth control, and so a woman popped babies out every year. But secondly, probably if you had 13 to 16 children, only 6, maybe 5 or 6 of them made it into adulthood. And your children were as important to you as your land, because the more kids you had, the more land you could acquire. So children were gems in those days, and you wanted a lot of kids. So it was a great disappointment to them that their first 2 daughters died. But in 1564, a son was born, and they named that son William, never ever guessing that that would be what the English world considers to be one of the greatest writers, and certainly the greatest playwright, and the man who made the English tongue respectable. John was moving up the ladder so that by the time William was 4 years old, his father had moved from ale taster to constable to chamberlain to high bailiff. High bailiff in Stratford is the same as the mayor. You couldn't get any higher. John had worked his way up until he was mayor of Stratford-on-Avon. Imagine being the son of the mayor. When Commedia dell'arte troops came through, these were touring troops from Italy, and they were fabulous mime troops, and they had wonderful pieces of humor. Who do you think had the front seat? William Shakespeare. Who do you think processed all that and collected it and put it in his brain and brought it back out again to you in Taming of the Shrew? William Shakespeare. I know we talk about the fact that artists suffer and live in garrets and are poor. Great artists are suffering, and that's why their artwork pours out, and I'm going to tell you, I think that's bunk. If you do a historical study of the great writers, musicians, painters, playwrights of any given period from the Greeks on, gosh, their moms and dads did all right. Somebody supported them. Someone gave them a real good childhood, and a lot of them had support right on up until they made their fame. Now, that's not true with William, because William, you see, chose the theater, and his parents were very strict Protestants, and once he made that choice, they signed him off forever. But for the first 12 years of his life, he had the world in his hands. It was a very tiny world indeed, Stratford-on-Avon, but he had all of it as the mayor's son, going to the best Latin schools, getting the best education. Now, tomorrow, we're going to follow William past the age of 12 into his teenage years, a time